Hello, everyone. I'm Louise. That was a big head. Well, the first thing, this is my first time on the Hunter Valley. As I was telling everybody I was coming up here, everyone had such great things to say, and it's lived up to its reputation. So the first thing I want to say is I am so grateful to be here. Down in Victoria, we don't have a lot of Aboriginal Catholics, so it is such an honour to be amongst mob, to be listening to stories, to be hearing wisdom. Kelly, yesterday, oh my goodness, I took so much away from that. Even my 9-year-old son was listening. But this right here, I am Wonkunguru Yali Yundi, and we are from Birdsville in the Simpson Desert. And on my grandmother's side, I am Gundit Chamara. And as Sabrina introduced, she took away a big chunk of my introduction. But I'm also Vietnamese and Chinese on my father's side. So as I am a guest on these lands, I would like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians, the Wonnarua people. I want to pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to all the elders who have been with us throughout this assembly. It honestly it's an honour to be with you guys. I want to extend that acknowledgement to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are with us today and throughout this assembly. And I want to say thank you to the allies who walk beside us. And while I have this opportunity, I also want to acknowledge one little person, my son. He's with us today. You may have seen him around with his little possum. Sorry, there was a different slide there, but I'm not sure what happened. So my Romeo, his name is, he is my heart. He's the reason for my hope. When things get tough, his presence reminds me of why I keep moving forwards. Today, when I share my story, it's not just about my past, it's about the future that I hope that he will inherit. A future of courage, a future of possibility, and a future of love. So, my prayer is that he will walk further than I ever did because of the decisions that we make here today. Who am I to stand in front of this whole assembly and inspire hope in people? I'm an ordinary person. I don't come from a family that I can trace back my lineage. I wasn't raised by elders who passed down their knowledge, and I actually didn't have parents who could have protected me. I didn't go through ceremony, nor do I know how to speak language. Does this make me any less Aboriginal or any less worthy to be here? This is a question I have asked myself so many times over the years. My story isn't a poetic one. It doesn't fit the narrations we're used to hearing. It's filled with shameful detail that we're told not to mention. So again, I ask the question, am I any less Aboriginal or worthy? No. So, I'm going to start that again. And I'm going to stand in my superhero pose and I'm going to speak with integrity. I stand before you today a proud Aboriginal woman. I am also Vietnamese and Chinese. I am a mother. I am a sister. I am an auntie. I am a daughter. I came today to share the story of all 6 of my siblings. For those who came before me, fell through the cracks and got lost. For those who don't have a voice, I came and I speak for them. So as you can see, this school right here is Xavier College. I have the honour at the moment to teach senior school English, history and RE. But teaching has never just been about subjects or content for me. I studied 5 long years for this. There had to be, some light in there. It's been about formation. It's been about building relationships. And it's been about walking alongside the next generation as they discover who they are. In this space, I also have the honour of doing the work of reconciliation in my way. I offer voices of perspective. I role model what it means to be an Aboriginal person. And I hold a gentle space, sometimes for some very hard conversations. Before this, I served as the engagement officer at the Aboriginal Catholic Ministry of Victoria. There was a photo of Auntie Sherry alongside the other one, but this role was a full circle moment for me because as I was growing up, I remember me and my family standing in line to receive food parcels. Years later, I got to stand metaphorically in that same position, except not to receive this time, but to serve. I had the privilege of supporting others in need, of praying for families at funerals, and of advocating for culture. The very culture I was once afraid to embrace as a young girl. But those roles are what I do. My true credibility comes from the journey that I have walked. I have lived disadvantaged, of struggle, and of searching for belonging. And I have also lived the power of hope. The people who believed in me, the faith that sustained me, and the choices that changed my path. That's why I'm here today, not just to share the hard parts of my story, but to show what hope can look like in action. And I also invite you to see yourselves too as pilgrims of hope. So today I want to take you on a journey in 3 parts. First, through the hardship and instability of my early years. Then through the people and moments that turned me towards the light. And finally, to the hope and healing that carry me forward today. Pilgrims of Hope, the theme of the Catholic Church. As we all have the duty, all the keynotes to talk about this theme, when I first got presented with it, I thought back to when I taught it earlier in the year to my RE class. And as a true English teacher, of course I'm going to take out key vocabulary. So what does pilgrim mean in the Catholic Church? It means a traveller on a journey of faith. And hope means trusting in God, despite all of the challenges. My whole life, I have felt that something was protecting me. I used to call it ambition, but I recognise that now as hope. Hope by the Holy Spirit, and hope from my grandfather and great-grandmother, my ancestors who kept whispering in my ear to turn away from the darkness every time I was tested. Hope is what carried me from a childhood where survival seemed impossible into a life where I get to stand before you today. And it is hope that continues to guide me because I am still on my journey. But with every journey, there's a start. And my start starts with my mum. This is my mum. My mum was 14 years old when she had me. I'm the eldest of 7 children. She was a baby with a baby. And a year later, her only parent, my grandfather, he passed away. She was left to navigate life alone, With a baby in her arms and grief in her heart, she fell between the cracks and she got lost. My grandfather, sadly, had been a heavy drinker. And his mother, my great-grandmother, she was stolen from Birdsville and taken down to Adelaide. That wound of displacement and loss, it corroded my family for generations to come. My mum never had the chance to grow into adulthood because the teenage years that are so crucial for brain development, for learning identity, resilience, and impulse control, she never got that because she was thrust into survival. Alcohol became her escape. And for us 7 kids, that escape came at a heavy cost. It meant instability. It meant moving house and schools constantly, and often being kept out of school altogether. But more than that, it meant growing up in a home marked by alcoholism, substance abuse, and violence. It meant being exposed to things no child should ever see or carry. It meant physical and sexual abuse. And it meant the trauma of watching my mum try to take her own life. Those wounds shaped my childhood. They left scars I will carry forever. But they do not define who I am and who I chose to be. With hope, with my faith, I am breaking that cycle. I'm watching little possum clap hands for me here. I actually remember one day vividly as a 7 or 8-year-old child. I wanted to go to school desperately. I remember asking my mum if we're going to school that day, and she said, "Nah, bub, you guys get to have the day off today." She made it sound like a treat. But I was disheartened because that was my norm. So, stubborn little me went and found a backpack, and I tried to pack it as best as I could. I didn't quite know what to put in there. I think I stuffed a Barbie and whatever book I could find. And I started walking. I just took off. I started walking down the highway. 7 to 8 years old, just walking. I got 3/4 of the way there, and a car pulls up next to me. My sisters dobbed me in. My mum told me to hop in, and she drove me the rest of the way. But the first stop I had in that school was the canteen. I asked them if they could make me a sandwich because I didn't have any food to bring that day. So that day, sitting in yet another classroom, in yet another school with a bunch of new students that I didn't know, I felt something ignite in me. I was part of life again. I wasn't in the darkness of that house. That hunger for education, that was hope alive in me. So, the instability of my early years carried into my teenage years. School had slipped through my fingers, and I was actually out of education for nearly 2 years. But at 16 years old, I made a decision that shifted the course of my journey. I walked into the local high school and I enrolled myself. And in that single act of hope, it placed me in the path of this teacher. I went to the slide a bit sooner than I anticipated, but this is Mrs. Forster. She was amazing. Short white bob, straight hair, straight fringe. She's still got the same haircut till this day. She would bake scones for us and make cakes. And when I was at home, I'd text her and ask her for recipes, and she'd share them. She'd share stories about going to Italy every 6 weeks and hiking. And she showed me a glimpse into a world that I couldn't even imagine. This photo to the right is only 2 months ago. Decades later, she's still supporting my journey. The thing is, I put Miss Forster in this slide because every single one of us can think of that one teacher that stood by them and never let them down, that went above and beyond. By the time I met Mrs. Forster, I was actually out of home. I was living in chaos. There was a lot of drugs in the house at the time, and I was living amongst brokenness. I was actually caring for my baby sister because my mum wasn't well enough to do so. One morning in my year 12, I hadn't actually made it to school, and Mrs. Forster knocked on my front door. Can you imagine waking up to see your senior school English teacher at your front door? She had driven half an hour to see why I wasn't there. I stood with my sister on my hip and I explained the story. She said to me, "Get ready, bring her along with you." That day she held my sister and she continued to teach the class. She did more than teach me English, she believed in me. She nominated me for awards, signed me up for activities, drove my mum and me to award ceremonies. She stood beside me when I couldn't stand myself. She showed me what it means to lift someone up and believe in them. However, even with Mrs. Forster's support, life didn't suddenly become easy. After school, I actually tried university 3 times, and 3 times I failed. It wasn't because I was incapable. It was because I didn't have the foundations that students usually take for granted. I had missed too many years of consistent schooling. I'd never learnt the habits of studying, of being in one place at a time, of planning or focusing on long-term goals. I didn't know academic language and I didn't know how to write an essay. And I didn't have a family to lean on. It felt like trying to build a house without the bricks. But I always believed that education was my ladder. It was my way out of poverty, my way out of the life I was born into. But climbing that ladder wasn't easy. At times I was tempted to give up. Gave up 3 times. To take the easy way out, to settle for the short-term comfort instead of climbing the ladder. And that's why I love this image. Don't burn your opportunities for a temporary comfort. It reminded me that despite quitting those 3 times, I had to keep going back. If I would have stopped permanently, I would have stayed stuck at the bottom. But by keeping hold of that ladder, even when it was hard, I eventually climbed out to where I am today. And it actually reminds me of this other quote. This is a man, his name is Napoleon Hill, and he did a study on success. And he said, "Remember, when your plans fail, that temporary defeat is not permanent failure." And in hindsight, that was my truth. My failures were temporary defeats, not the end of my story, even though it felt like it at the time. And because I refused to see them as final, I kept climbing my ladder until I reached the days I dreamed of. It took me 5 years to finish my degree, but I finally got there. And this photo to the right is my first day as a teacher. It was actually during my first attempt at university that I met my first Aboriginal academic. Her name was Marnie. She was beautiful. That's why I wore this suit today. I remember her wearing a suit that day. She dressed so well and she carried herself with elegance. She was everything I never believed I could be. Over time, we became friends though. And she shared stories and struggles. And through her vulnerabilities, I began to truly connect with her and see possibility. I began to see that I could become everything that I desired in her. She showed me that there was a place for me in spaces that I thought were off limits. In her, I saw hope. And sometimes that's all it takes. Seeing one person who makes you believe that you can be more than the story that you were told. However, before I could recognize the light, I had to walk through some shadows. To understand my journey, I also need to take you to a darker place. Because only then can you see the light that came after. The truth is, because of the trauma and chaos of life with Mum, I developed a deep desire to escape. I developed a deep sense of shame. My mum would let men do things to me and make it seem normal in the light of day. She would also try to harm herself. I remember one day vividly where she invited me to the hospital after she had tried to take her own life. I saw the physical damage she had done to herself. And when I had learned it was all because of an argument she had with a boyfriend at the time, I felt an anger that was bigger than me. As a 15-year-old, I was angry that she would be so reckless as to nearly leave 7 children motherless. For me, it was the biggest betrayal of a mother's love. I carried that shame and unconsciously began to wove it with my Aboriginality. At the same time, my dad, who was a migrant at the time and had faced racism himself, he told me to hide my Aboriginality. I was one of those chameleons. You look Spanish, you look Italian. Don't ever tell them you're Aboriginal because people will look down on you. He had seen how Aboriginal people were treated, and in his pain, he internalized that racism. I grew up caught between 2 worlds, between intergenerational trauma and the pressure to reject it. It was like living between a wound and a rejection. That was my rock and my hard place. I carried shame. I carried silence, and I carried the need to escape. But as a fully healed adult now, I look back and I understand that my mum's self-inflicted wounds, they were not about the boyfriend, but a sign of a much greater damage that was bigger than any of us. I share that moment because it shows the depth of my darkness that I came from, the wounds I carried, and the cost of intergenerational trauma. But I also share it so that when you see the hope that follows, you'll know it isn't naive or it wasn't easy. It's real because it was chosen in the midst of despair. So as a young adult, that's when something started to shift. The Aboriginal department at the university that I attended, it was called Urala. That community welcomed me simply because I'm Aboriginal. I can't even begin to describe how that feels, coming from a family that I didn't fit in. It's the same thing as what I feel at this assembly. But that welcome, every time there's an Aboriginal community and someone says, "Hey sister," when they don't even know my name, that plants seeds of pride. Not long after, I was actually called to move back to a place where I felt like home. I've always felt there was something so sacred about Aboriginal spirituality, how country calls us back and we can feel it in our bodies. I have always been a spiritual person. I actually grew up Buddhist on my father's side, and I would attend temple every Sunday. But I always held the belief that all religions, they actually share the same deep truths of love, compassion, and light. But when I moved, I began to hunger. I wanted something deeper in my spirituality, and I wanted to practice. I wanted to go somewhere and practice compassion and love the same way that I would exercise my body at a gym. And I prayed for guidance. In prayer, I actually visualized a doorway. And I asked God which doorway I should walk through in order to access Him. Not longer, I felt prompted to return to the very first church I had ever stepped into as a child, the parish attached to my old primary school. This is St. James. So I Googled the Mass times and I went along. At first, I actually started going with a close friend, and she would whisper things to me. When you give with your right, you don't let your left hand know. She would explain concepts and she would help me feel included. Coming from chaos, I loved the traditions. I loved the order of the Mass. I love singing with everyone. And I love that we all take the moment to turn to each other and wish each other peace. It was a stark contrast to the chaos that I was used to. Before long, all the little white-haired ladies, they would come up to me asking me for help. And I said yes. And in serving, I started to belong. That's where I became comfortable. That's where I started to find my voice. And eventually I asked to be baptised. I spent a year in catechism classes, and then one of the most profound moments of my life, I was baptised alongside my son. We walked through that doorway together. It wasn't just a ritual. It was a choice I embraced wholeheartedly. My journey then took another turn. Serving as the engagement officer at the Aboriginal Catholic Ministry of Victoria was a season of true healing. At first, I was hesitant. That shame of my Aboriginality, it was still there. It didn't just disappear. I'd actually hold back from posting things on social media. But with every celebration, every accomplishment, and with every person that walked alongside me, thank you, Auntie Sherry, and thank you to the Binat partners, I began to accept and love who I am and who I grew to be. At one Natsik retreat, Auntie Sharon actually told me something that has never left me. She turned to me and said, "Your Aboriginality is a gift." And she was right. It is something only God could have given me. I realised I had a choice. I could keep rejecting it, or I could finally accept it for its beauty. And I chose to accept it. That brings me to the key people that I've spoken about and the others who have accompanied me, but I haven't had the chance to mention them today. The ones who saw my value when I couldn't see it myself. They lifted me up. And in the words of St. Ignatius, they were men and women for others. Today I work in a Jesuit school where I get to serve students with the gifts God has given me. This woman's name is Mel, and she actually invited me into this role. She accompanies and mentors me through my ups and downs, the way I accompany my students. She saw my value, and she continues to lift me up through self-determination and having faith in me. She actually never lets me talk bad about myself. My upbringing was filled with darkness, but I made a decision long ago. I would not let it make me hard. I would stay vulnerable. Because vulnerability and hope are what allow us to hear God's call. And along my journey, God has sent people to save me. It actually reminds me of that story from the movie Pursuit of Happiness. Have you guys seen it? The young son, he turns to his father and he shares a parable. A man is drowning, he says. A boat comes to offer help, but the man says, no, God will save me. A while later, another boat comes, and again he refuses. No, thank you, God will save me. Before long, the man drowns and he dies. And he goes to heaven. And upon meeting God, he asks, "God, why didn't you save me?" And God responds, "I sent you 2 big boats, you dummy." The message of that parable is simple. God's help often arrives through ordinary people and unexpected means. And if we close our eyes waiting for something miraculous, we risk missing the very salvation He is already sending. God's help in my life didn't come as lightning bolts and grand miracles. It came in the subtle, ordinary ways. It came with Mrs. Forster knocking on my front door. It was the Aboriginal department offering me a place to belong. It was Mel inviting me into my school community. These were the boats God sent me. And I've learnt that being a pilgrim of hope means keeping your eyes open, your heart soft, and your spirit ready to recognise this help, even when it comes in unexpected ways. So to the youth, have faith that God will care for you. Just as He cares for the flowers and the birds, you will be just fine. Know what you desire and be persistent. Failure is only failure if you stop trying. And never forget where you came from. Your roots give you strength and wisdom. And they remind you to pay it forward so that the next generation can walk further than we ever dreamed. To the leaders, open your eyes to see the value in our young people. Don't only notice them when they're succeeding. commit to lifting them up even when they stumble and fall and stumble and fall and stumble and fall, because that is when they need you the most. I want to leave you with this image, often called the tree of life. It grows even without soil beneath it. It shouldn't have survived, but it did. Like this tree, you may not always have the perfect foundation. You may face instability and setbacks. But with hope, with faith, and with people to support you, you will grow and thrive. So keep standing, keep growing, and keep making space for the next generation. Thank you.